All right, so picture this with me. Okay. It's the late 90s dot-com boom. Everything's going crazy. And you've got this energy giant, Enron. They were killing it. Absolutely killing it.
Wall Street, darling.
Oh, yeah. Raking in billions. Everyone wanted a piece. But then, bam, it all came crashing down. Scandal, fraud. I mean, we're talking Bernie Madoff levels of shady dealings here.
Oh, yeah. Enron makes Madoff look like an amateur.
So you might be thinking, okay, but like, what does this Enron thing even have to do with me? Well, strap in, because today's deep dive, we're going to unpack how this whole thing, this massive corporate meltdown, still impacts every single one of us today. And we've got your research, we've got articles, the whole 9 yards ready to dissect.
Let's do it.
And joining me to break it all down is our expert, who, let me tell you, can spot a cooked book from a mile away. So let's rewind a little bit, set the stage. What exactly was Enron before it went full-on supernova?
That's the thing about Enron. They started out, kind of your typical energy company. Pipelines, natural gas, keeping the lights on, all that.
Right, the essential stuff.
Yeah, but they had bigger ambitions, branching out into all sorts of ventures.
Yeah.
Broadband, international markets. They were even better on the weather.
Wait, hold on. Betting on the weather? That's like a thing?
Oh, yeah, they were trading weather derivatives, basically making bets on if it was going to be like sunny or rainy in a certain location.
So hedging their bets against Mother Nature.
Yeah, hedging risk, or at least that's what they said it was.
Sounds a little bit like gambling to me, but hey, what do I know? I'm not a high-flying energy trader.
Right, right. But the thing is, this whole diversification thing, as innovative as it might have seemed at the time, it made Enron incredibly complex.
I bet.
And that complexity, that became the perfect cover, the perfect smokescreen for what came next, the accounting shenanigans.
Oh, yes. The creative accounting. Because, who needs actual profits when you can just invent them?
Pretty much. And the linchpin, the key to their whole scheme, was something called special purpose entities, SPEs.
Okay, SPEs. Lay it on me. What are we talking about here?
All right, imagine you're having a garage sale.
Okay, I like where this is going.
But instead of actually selling your old stuff, you just dash it at your neighbors, pretend it doesn't exist.
Nee.
That's Enron in a nutshell.
So they were basically playing this massive game of hide and seek with their debt.
Yes, making their balance sheet look way better than it actually was.
And how did they get away with that for so long? I mean, surely someone was checking their math, right?
You'd think, wouldn't you? And that's where things get even wilder. That's where mark-to-market accounting enters the picture.
Okay, hit me with it. What is mark-to-market accounting, and how did Enron weaponize it?
So mark-to-market accounting, in its purest form, it's not inherently a bad thing.
Okay.
It's basically a way of valuing assets based on their current market value, which, can fluctuate, right?
Right, like my vintage vinyl collection is only worth as much as someone's willing to pay for it on eBay, like right now.
Exactly.
Right.
But here's where Enron got tricky. They started applying this method to their long-term contracts, even ones that span decades.
Whoa.
Yeah, imagine valuing your entire retirement fund based on what it might be worth in 30 years.
That's a long shot.
It's beyond speculative.
Yeah.
And that's what they did.
So instead of recording the actual revenue they were making over time, they were projecting future profits, basically, and counting those as if they were already in the bank.
Exactly.
Talk about counting your chickens before they hatch.
Precisely. And this inflated their earnings tremendously. And of course, what happens when your earnings look amazing? Your stock price goes through the roof.
Skyrockets.
Investors were blinded by this seemingly incredible growth. I had no idea it was all built on, like, smoke and mirrors.
It's like inflating your net worth by, like, adding your dream car to your assets, even though you haven't even bought it yet, let alone, actually earn the money for it.
Exactly. And for a while, that kind of accounting magic, it can work, especially in a booming market, right? Where everyone's riding high on speculation, but
it's all an illusion.
It's like building a house on sand. The moment the market shifts or those projected profits don't materialize, the whole thing crumbles.
And crumble it did. But before we get to Enron's very dramatic downfall, we have to talk about the other big player in this whole saga, Arthur Andersen, their accounting firm.
Oh, yeah.
And we're talking about one of the big 5 accounting firms at the time. They were responsible for making sure that everything was on the up and up. So the question is, were they just totally clueless about Enron's little game, or were they in on it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And to answer that, we need to kind of delve into the very heart of auditing and this crucial concept of auditor independence.
Okay, auditor independence sounds important. Break it down for us.
Like, imagine going to a doctor, right? And this doctor, they also own the pharmaceutical company that makes all the drugs that they're prescribing you.
Yeah, that'd be super shady. I'd definitely want a second opinion, maybe report them to someone, too.
Exactly. It's a major conflict of interest, right?
For sure.
Well, the same principle applies to auditors. They're supposed to be completely independent from the companies they're auditing,
Hmm.
like a financial watchdog, making sure everything is legit. No conflicts of interest, no backroom deals. Because when you have that, that's when you erode trust. That's when the whole system just goes kaput.
So where did things go wrong with Arthur Andersen and Enron? Were they, like, buddies or something?
Well, here's where the lines got incredibly blurry. Because, see, Arthur Andersen, they weren't just auditing Enron. Nope, they were also providing them with these very lucrative consulting services on the side. Talk about a major incentive to maybe possibly overlook a few irregularities in the books.
Ah, so maybe they're more like frenemies with benefits.
Something like that.
Not a good look.
No, not at all. And remember, we're talking about one of the biggest accounting firms in the world at the time. They were supposed to be the gold standard, the guardians of financial transparency. But the allure of those fat consulting fees, well, it seems like it clouded their judgment just a tad.
Yeah, just a tad. Okay, so we've got shady accounting practices, we've got a potentially compromised auditor, and we have a whole lot of investors who are about to get a very, very rude awakening. Set the scene for us. How did Enron, a company once worth billions, how did they go belly up so fast?
It was like a house of cards, in a hurricane. In late 2001, you had a few savvy analysts, and they started to notice that something just wasn't adding up with Enron's financials.
The numbers weren't quite crunching, huh?
No, they couldn't reconcile those sky-high profits with the company's increasingly, well, tangled and very opaque financial statements.
Kind of like trying to make sense of your bank statement after a weekend in Vegas, except multiply that confusion by like a billion.
Exactly. And these, like, whispers of doubt, they turned into shouts as more analysts started digging. And, frankly, they could not believe what they were uncovering. It was only a matter of time before the whole thing just blew wide open.
And then the dominoes started falling.
Big time. The SEC, they launched a formal investigation. And as more details of Enron's, creative accounting came to light, well, investor confidence, it evaporated faster than a puddle in Death Valley.
And the stock price, I'm guessing that didn't exactly hold steady.
Let's just say it went from hero to zero, faster than you can say mark-to-market accounting. We're talking free fall, from over $90 a share to less than $1 in a matter of months. It was a bloodbath.
Brutal. And I can't even imagine what that must have been like for Enron's employees, who had their life savings, their retirement funds all tied up in company stock.
Devastating. Thousands of people, they lost everything, their jobs, their retirement funds, their homes, all because they put their faith in a company that, well, they'd been cooking the books for years. The human cost of Enron's collapse, it was immeasurable.
Yeah. It's a very stark reminder that behind those stock tickers, behind those balance sheets, those are real people, real lives. Okay, so Enron's finished, but what about Arthur Andersen, their auditor buddy? Did they manage to weather the storm?
Not even close. Remember those shredded documents we talked about earlier?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, turns out destroying evidence, generally frowned upon, especially by the feds. Arthur Andersen, they were found guilty of obstruction of justice. And their reputation, well, it was shot.
So they basically went down with the ship.
Pretty much. Their conviction was later overturned by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Unlike a technicality. But the damage was done. Clients, they fled. Their name was mud. And the once muddy Arthur Andersen, they basically ceased to exist. It's a cautionary tale for the ages, really, about the importance of DAR. Say it with me now.
Auditor independence.
You got it.
Yeah.
But even with Arthur Andersen facing the music, the shockwaves from Enron's collapse, well, they were just beginning to be felt.
Okay, so Enron's gone, Arthur Andersen's toast. We're all left kind of picking up the pieces here. But this wasn't just some isolated incident, right? I mean, some good had to come out of this whole mess, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Enron scandal was a wake-up call. And not just for Wall Street. It sent shockwaves through, like, the entire corporate world, forced everyone to kind of take a hard look in the mirror and ask themselves, are we doing things right?
And what did that soul-searching lead to?
Some of the most significant regulatory reforms in U.S. history, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Remember how Enron was able to run wild with all those shady accounting practices?
Yeah.
Well, after the scandal broke, lawmakers knew they had to step in and, prevent another Enron from happening.
Enter the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, or SOX for short.
Exactly. SOX was a game changer.
Okay, so SOX was a big deal. But for those of us who don't, speak fluent financial jargon, break it down for us. What did it actually do?
So, in a nutshell, SOX really brought the hammer down on corporate accounting and governance.
Okay.
Tightened regulations, increased oversight, made it a heck of a lot harder for companies to cook the books. Think stricter auditing rules, more transparency, holding those at the top accountable for their actions.
So if Enron had tried to pull that mark-to-market stunt today,
Gotcha.
they'd be caught red-handed.
Oh, you better believe it. Remember those independent auditors we were talking about?
Right.
SOX created a whole new board to oversee the auditing profession, making sure they're actually doing their jobs and not just, rubber stamping whatever companies put in front of them.
No more frenemies with benefits.
Not if they want to stay in business. And here's the kicker. SOX didn't just impact those at the top. Remember all those hoops you had to jump through to get your mortgage approved?
Oh, yeah.
You can thank SOX for that, making sure the banks are playing by the rules and not inflating their assets like Enron did.
Wow. So SOX has had a real impact, even on, everyday folks like us.
Absolutely. It's like that old saying, trust but verify. SOX made sure there's a whole lot more verifying going on in the corporate world these days.
I like it. So Enron's legacy lives on, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a catalyst for some real tangible changes in how we regulate corporate behavior. It's almost like they accidentally did us a favor by being so terrible.
Almost. But let's be real. No system is foolproof. There will always be those who try to, game the system, find loopholes, exploit weaknesses. It's human nature, right?
That's a sobering thought. So where does that leave us? What's the key takeaway from this whole Enron saga, especially for those of us who aren't, financial wizards?
I think it comes down to, being informed, being skeptical, not being afraid to ask tough questions. Don't just blindly trust what you hear, especially when it comes to, money and power. Do your research. Look beyond the headlines. And remember, even the most sophisticated systems, they can be vulnerable to greed and deception.
Like that old saying, if it sounds too good to be true,
It probably is.
it probably is. And that's where you come in. Because while, yeah, regulations and oversight are crucial, it's that collective awareness, that healthy skepticism that ultimately safeguards against future Enrons.
Absolutely.
So we all have a part to play in, keeping the system honest. We can't just sit back and assume someone else is watching the store.
Couldn't agree more. Whether you're an investor, an employee, just a citizen, ask questions. Demand transparency. And don't be afraid to raise a red flag if something doesn't feel right.
Words to live by. Well, on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. The Enron scandal, it happened over 20 years ago, but the lessons, they're timeless. So as you navigate today's world, this complex world of cryptocurrencies, social media giants, these ever-evolving financial markets, just remember the story of Enron. Are we any less susceptible to these kinds of scandals today? Or have we actually learned from the mistakes of the past? Food for thought. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the Enron scandal. We hope you found this episode insightful, eye-opening, and maybe even a little bit empowering. Because, knowledge is power. And now that you know the Enron story, well, you're better equipped to spot those warning signs and ask those tough questions. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay vigilant.